Hello everyone, welcome to Multipolar Report. My name is Tom, and today we're going to be going over some of the reports that have happened between March 15th and March 17th. To start off, I would like to go over some of the news or follow up to the news from the previous video, which was in regards to the heightened tensions between Israel and Lebanon, where we left off with Israel digesting the incident where they had neutralized what they claimed to be a Lebanese terrorist that had planted explosives, and that they were going to respond. And we have gotten a follow-up statement where Israel's defense minister has reported that whoever did the attack will regret it. We will find the right place, the right way, and we will cripple whoever is responsible for the attack. This statement is, again, it's a very hawkish government in Israel under Benjamin Netanyahu. Hawkish traditionally under Netanyahu, but extremely hawkish now given the fragility of the situation in Israel itself, where, as we covered in the last episode, Israel has already stated that, or the prime minister has already stated that they are on the verge of an overall civil war because of Netanyahu's constitutional reforms. And heightened tensions at the home front is leading to a more hawkish stance, in my opinion, abroad, where we could see Israel try to rev up support domestically through posturing abroad. Additionally, in the Middle East, we have Iran has agreed to halt weapon shipments to the Houthis in Yemen. This would be very big news where China, if it's true, of course, because these things, I've seen plenty of promises in the past between rebel proxy parents, essentially promising to stop funding their proxies. But if it is true, it is very big news where we could finally see a peace come to Yemen, and we could see the catastrophic war or civil war that's been taking place there come to an end. And this seems to have been the carrot that Iran has offered to, or the concession Iran has offered to Saudi Arabia to agree to the neutralization of diplomatic ties. Similarly, Saudi Arabia it's also been reported through one of their ministers, which is yet to be officially corroborated, that they will not allow the United States to stage operations against Iran through Saudi Arabia, which is something I theorized in my previous video, but it looks like that is more or less the agreement that these two states have come to. And this is a big win for China as well, where China can come out looking even greater as the peacemaker in this arrangement. And it's very damaging to the United States in this region because the United States has really burnt its reputation, where instead of appearing like a stand-up country for democracy and standing up for democracy everywhere, they got bogged down in these wars where we funded, as multiple Pentagon spokespersons have described, as moderate rebels. And it's really damaged the reputation, and we've gotten stuck into those forever wars, where we've also created those forever wars. And now China's coming in and actually bringing peace to the Middle East, which then further isolates the U.S. from this region. Additionally, we are also going to be covering some of the events on the home front in the United States and in the Western world, where the financial hurricane that's currently hitting the West is coming thicker and faster. We now have, over this past week, Credit Suisse has required a bailout from the Swiss Federal Reserve, or the Swiss National Bank, which had provided Credit Suisse with 50 billion euros in financial assistance, bailout money. And 50 billion euros is 10% of Credit Suisse's, roughly 10% of Credit Suisse's official assets, or their official book numbers, evaluation. That means that 10% of Credit Suisse was default. or it just they were running a deficit of 10%. So you can clearly see the amount of risk and liquidity issues that are happening in Western financial markets. Additionally, another interesting statistic is that I believe when I last checked, the Swiss GDP was around $600 billion. So it's almost 10% of the Swiss GDP that the Swiss National Bank just printed, essentially, in bailout money for the for the Credit Suisse. These are all very shocking figures. And to compound onto Credit Suisse's issues, according to Reuters, there are banks throughout the West that are now not as willing to work with Credit Suisse, where they're now going to start to curb their dealings. And this is thus further going to compound their liquidity issues, where as Credit Suisse begins to struggle even more to find capital to come into their bank, confidence in the banking system, is particularly with Credit Suisse, is going to decline rapidly, where they very well could very well default on their loans. That is to be seen, though. An additional economic graph, which I grabbed from that George Gammon, who you should definitely follow on Twitter, grabbed, is that the discount window borrowing is if a bank needs liquidity fast in the United States, I believe it's limited to, they can go to the discount window, and it's all public who went to the discount window. They can go to the discount window, make a demand for, or a request for how much money they need in order to cover their liabilities, to make sure that they don't go bankrupt or default on any of their payments. And we hit a record this past week of $152 billion was taken out at the discount window. In 2008, for the Great Financial Crisis, you are looking at around $118 billion. We are $30 to $40 billion greater than that. Hence, it really shows the liquidity issues that these banks are running to nationwide, and as you can see with Credit Suisse, internationally. So this financial hurricane, it does look as though it's really only getting started and not going to be slowing down. And going into next week, we have the very important Federal Reserve chair meeting, which is going to discuss the prospect of increasing interest rates again. It was, before all this, I believe it was bedded in that they were going to be raising interest rates by 0.5 to 0.75. But since all the financial upheaval, it is now projected that they will increase interest rates by 0.25 or 25 basis points, but they might not even raise them at all. And that's going to be a very big decision that's going to be coming. But I would like to add that the European Central Bank had raised interest rates, I believe, yesterday, excuse me, in spite of all this financial turmoil. So we could see a disconnect with the bank, with the Federal Reserve, where they continue to take this hawkish stance in spite of all these financial institutions almost collapsing. Then, on to the next story. This is, again, another follow-up from last week, where last couple days, where a couple days ago, we were reporting on a Russian fighter jet intercepting an American Reaper drone. And it turns out now that the Pentagon has released footage of the incident. And we can clearly see the Russian fighter jet is dropping its fuel onto the drone. And it did this around, we saw this done twice, but apparently it did multiple other passovers. And the Pentagon is reporting that on one of the passovers, the Russian fighter jet collided with the propeller of the drone. It could also very well be, as has been theorized, that maybe because the jet is going so fast, it's just dumped fuel, it could have bent the propeller regardless of the situation. The drone ended up crashing into the water, which now the Russians are conducting an operation to try to recover the drone. And according to GeoConfirmed, they have confirmed that based on the images released, that the drone was moving towards Crimea, and it turned away upon interception on this point with the red fighter jet dot indicator, and then it began to move away, where then it was around this point that the fighter jets began to conduct the more aggressive maneuvers and damaged the drone, which had then turned off and crashed most likely over here or over here. As GeoConfirmed has stressed, it is very rough estimations of the flight path. However, this is what is believed, and this is then going against some Western sources, where on NBC last night at 7 p.m., I believe, they were reporting that the Russian jet aircraft intercepted the drone much further south in the Black Sea, closer to Turkey than Crimea. And the Pentagon is not stressing the point that the drone was moving towards Crimea, but rather it seemed like it was more innocuous, where it was going left to right in the middle of the Black Sea and then got intercepted. The Russians say that the drone approached Crimea with its transponders off, and then they intercepted it around this point, which would be, I think, 30 nautical miles out from Sevastopol, and then, which 10 nautical miles is considered your international zone. So it was still in international, it was still in public international air, and then the Russians intercepted it, and then they conducted their operations to bring it down. The Americans say that there's no requirement to have a transponder on for a state-owned aircraft, and that the drone itself was in international airspace, so there's no justification for the Russians to take down the drone because it is in international airspace. Those are the two sides on it, and the Russians, however, after initially denying that they brought it down, have now, through Shoigu, provided a state award to the fighter pilot for taking down the American drone through some very, I would say, evasive, or I would say courageous at the very least. Some people say it's stupid. Some people say it was a phenomenal move. Whichever, very courageous nonetheless operation. Additionally, we have the International Criminal Court. It has issued an arrest warrant for Vladimir Putin, and the reason for the warrant is Putin is allegedly responsible for the war crime of unlawful deportation of children and that of the unlawful transfer of children from occupied areas of Ukraine to the Russian Federation. The pro-Ukrainian sides argue or state that Putin is de-Ukrainianizing the Donbass in particular, or any place that he is currently has his forces occupied, and that these children are moved out of these war zones not for the purpose of protecting the children, but for the purpose of brainwashing them and de-Ukrainianizing them. The Russians, there's obviously a word for that they use differently. It is the G word, but that G word would certainly not help the algorithm, so I'm sure you know what that G word is. The Russians argue that this is a war zone. We don't want, children on the front line being subjugated to shelling or indiscriminate shelling or any offensive accidents, at the very least, they would argue. And we are moving them to a safer area. That is at least what the Russians are arguing. Then we move on to the International Criminal Court, and this is a very interesting graph, which is posted by Ukrainian Battle Map, because they even say now if Vlad goes to any 123 countries in green, then they will have a legal obligation to arrest him and send him to the International Criminal Court. That's interesting, because the countries that you would assume would be the most important are not in here. The United States, China, India, Saudi Arabia, and also Turkey. This is all very interesting because if the countries in green don't arrest him, who then arrests, or what's the legal obligation? Do you get kicked out of the organization? So I'm sure that there is something in the books for if you don't arrest a person, but if you shake their hands, for example, in Istanbul and during a BRICS summit, then it creates a very dicey dynamic. So I think that it is going to inconvenience Putin because there will be political leaders that are trying to save face, particularly in South America. But there's very clear workarounds, and it's not mandatory that he flies into, for example, London. Putin is not going to be visiting London probably for the rest of his life for obvious reasons. In my opinion, I don't think this is going to even matter because I don't think he's going to be acting as a diplomat or a state representative for infinitely much longer, particularly because I think that once this war, or as he would say, a special military operation is over, whenever that might be, I believe that that is when he is going to be stepping down and that he's making this his legacy, essentially. But it's very interesting to see again that the United States, all the big players throughout the world, are not involved in the International Criminal Court because they know that they don't want to be held to the same standards. And that's so it's there could be something where maybe Putin goes to Mongolia and then the Mongolian authorities arrest him. But I think that's more absurd where, China works with Mongolia on very key industries and strategic interests where they wouldn't do that in my opinion. And what is the Hague going to do to Mongolia? So it's all very interesting, but it's just another update. And then we have Russia it is an update with arms supplies in Ukraine, where Slovakia and Poland have now pledged to send Ukraine their MiG-29s in even the next few days. There's not many of these MiG-29s because they've been swapping them out slowly for Western-made fighter jets. However, they are sending them whatever they have because these are types of aircraft that the Ukrainians know how to operate and also, super importantly, have the maintenance crews and parts on the ground to repair these vehicles. And this is the first countries to be sending Ukraine fighter jets, and the Ukrainians have responded stating that they appreciate it, but that what they really need is U.S.-made F-16 fighter jets. This is according to the BBC. The reason for the F-16 demand is that the West has much greater stock of ammunition for F-16s than they have for their MiG-29s. On top of that, the U.S. has NATO has a lot more F-16s than they have any of the MiG-29s. So this would increase the quantity potential of fighter jets being sent to Ukraine, while at the same time, in my opinion, that Ukraine sees the opportunity to have foreign fighter pilots, NATO volunteers, as you might say, conduct missions in Ukraine. And it's well known that Ukraine doesn't operate F-16s, so the crew for these fighter jets would have to be coming from a NATO country. And it's not safe on the runways for these F-16s. So, in my opinion, the F-16 game is a move to try to cause direct intervention from NATO against Russia, where they would operate, or NATO volunteers, would operate fighter jets missions from Poland, fly into Ukraine, then fly out of Ukraine and go back into Poland. And this would certainly cause a a big controversy where NATO pilots would be coming in direct contention with Russian fighter pilots. This is again in my scenario, and I believe Ukraine knows that, and they're looking for that direct intervention to try to assist them in a war that's looking more bleak overall for them. But on to the next story. We have President Erdogan. He has said that Turkey will start ratifying Finland's NATO application. This is the final piece of the puzzle, pretty much. There is also Hungary was a holdout, but Hungary is going to back them more likely than not in a March 27th vote to allow for the accession of Finland. However, this is leaving Sweden still left out of the big club, where Turkey is refusing to allow Sweden into NATO because of what the Turkey argues is that Sweden harbors terrorists, and they consider the Kurdish Workers' Party part of the militant. They consider them terrorists that operate in Turkey, and they want Sweden to hand over those militants that are hiding out in Sweden, but were given asylum by the Swedes. And it's yet to be seen if Sweden is going to be buckling on that commitment. But their NATO ascension does seem to be on the line for this, at least for now. Maybe they find a workaround for Turkey where Turkey gets, let's just say, for example, F-35s. Do I think they're going to get F-35s? No, but that would be an example of a trade-off with the United States to get Sweden into NATO as well. And on to our final batch of international news. We also have China is visiting Vladimir Putin in Moscow. I hope somebody has told Xi Jinping that Putin is now wanted by the International Criminal Court before he arrives. Otherwise, that could be a serious issue for Xi Jinping. I'm, of course, using sarcasm there. But so China's Xi Jinping is to meet Putin next week in first visit to Russia since the invasion began. This is according to CNN, but also very importantly, this is one of his first visits abroad since he's been reelected president or chairman of China. And what they're going to discuss, there was reports that they're going to be discussing further strategic integration of between Moscow and Beijing, with the two nations deepening partnership as the war rages on in Europe, and that there will be no limits to the relationship. They're the best of friends. And what I see coming out of this, in coordination with Russia stating that they're open to sharing their hypersonic Kinzhal missile technology with friendly nations, is that there will start to have a common weapon outfit or a common weapons licensing agreements where there's a standardization of infantry equipment and materials used between China and Russia, obviously depending on the terrain modifications that each of these vehicles and equipment possess. But that will see missile technology being shared between each other. And now if Russia's quantity begins to increase for some of their equipment, let's just say an AK-47, and it wouldn't be a surprise that if out of this meeting you have China stating that they'll have a standardized weapons program with Russia, where if China is producing the same weapons, it's difficult to pinpoint, or it gives the plausible deniability that it wasn't China that sent Russia weapons, but instead Russia produced them and they just happened to make the same weapons. It gives a little bit of plausible deniability, but importantly, I think that they want to share their missile programs and start sharing more information, particularly as they move on into this more confrontational world with the West. And additionally, following the visit to Putin, we have Lula, the president of Brazil, is going to be visiting the People's Republic of China, and he is visiting on March 28th. And what they're going to be mostly engaging is commercial actions where they want to develop more trade deals. They want to increase the trade balance between each other. And this would overall, if we are moving to a more, if BRICS provides an alternative to the petrodollar or an alternative to Western institutions or a Western economy, this would be significant for Brazil to establish these guarantees before committing to any big moves after the fact. And lastly, we have violent protests are erupting in France over Macron's retirement age push. Macron has been leveraging Parliament to pass a bill which would increase the pension minimum requirement age from 62 to 64. And now we have Macron, who failed to levy enough support, who then just invoked the nuclear option, as has been described by multiple outlets, and made an edict. And then he skirted a vote, and now he has decided unilaterally that is the new retirement age. It is 64 and no longer 62. This has caused riots throughout France, and on Monday, it is speculated, which the French Parliament was already in a state of complete breakdown and chaos, where they weren't able to accomplish anything because there was a state of civil war within the Parliament itself. And now they're going to be most likely on Monday, where lawmakers on the right and left are going to be filing a no confidence vote. And we could see then, very likely, a strong probability, where Macron will be removed from power, and we could see someone like Le Pen get put in. We could see, it'll be very interesting to see the next figure that steps up to the stage. But if Macron gets removed, it thus shows the ramifications of the instability that Russia has caused on Europe or Europe has also caused on themselves through the sanctions package, where the Europeans said, we will get Putin out of power. Right now, we are seeing the British government has fallen apart, where Boris Johnson's no longer the leader, and you had a leader swapped out in 1 month. You saw the Italian government fall apart, where then a relative populist leader has gotten elected there. And now we're seeing the French government completely fall apart. And this is also a very interesting story, where this is something, in my opinion, that a lot of European countries are going to be going through this decade, as the demographic shift towards a inverted pyramid. The cost of trying to maintain these pensions where people retire at 62 comfy is going to be insurmountable. And it's going to lead to a lot of social unrest and upheaval, where this is also getting compounded with stories like Credit Suisse and a financial hurricane hitting it at the same time, where we really could see a lot more violence throughout Europe and a lot more, I would say, instability, where the financial institutions are breaking down, and we're starting to see the first bits of the demographic crisis, the first waves of the tsunami that is the demographic crisis hitting Europe at the same time and leading to a lot of instability, which it'll be very difficult, if not impossible, for European states to come out of this crisis the same way, or in any of the same stature that they went into it. But that is a story that is going to continue to be perpetuated, and it is going to continue to happen until something pops, and then it's going to be in the news every day, or just consistent instability and consistent government collapse throughout. However, that is all the news that I have that I feel you should be updated about recently. I hope you enjoyed the video. I will again be uploading again the next multipolar report in a couple of days, probably Sunday. And then on Monday, I might even have another update, given the fact that a lot of financial markets are going to be opening. So there should be plenty to talk about after all the maneuvering over the weekend. And then we can also have a little bit of a weekend digest, where on Monday we can see and highlight a lot of the big plays and go in depth about the news, that there could be some kind of breakdown on Monday. Obviously, it's always low probability, but Monday will be a very significant day. Well, I'm glad you stuck around. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, please leave a like and a subscribe. It would mean the world to me, and it would tell me that you are enjoying my content. I hope that if you leave me a comment, I would appreciate it. Let me know if I'm doing a good job, and if you have any questions, I'm glad that you enjoyed the video. Hope you have a good day. Bye-bye.